privileged at Brentwood High School, as it was then, to learn 4 languages when I look back. 3 to A-level and an extra 1 to O-level, which was Russian. I can't speak, sadly, but that was immensely privileged. Went on to study politics, economics, French and German at Loughborough. And gosh, wasn't I lucky to end up in the job I ended up in there. The degree certainly enabled that profession. But I worked as a tourist guide in France. I worked in a bank in Luxembourg, and then walked into the European Parliament one day and said, here I am, and I was lucky enough to get the last internship, Robert Schuman Scholarship, where I worked on the question of youth unemployment. And so combined with my French and my German, I noticed already I was able to converse with everyone in the Parliament pretty much from the word go at that time. Admittedly, there were only 27 nations then. I'll come back to my use of languages in the job and return more to one of the real situations that Philippe and I have discussed very much, and you've heard 2 people mention it, which is what is happening in Brussels, where Brits could occupy 12% of the jobs in the EU institutions, but only occupy 5%. I'm today, I think, going to give those of you who are out there talking with opinion formers, decision makers, government ministers, even more arguments than you already have. So, yes, we are losing influence. No, we are not party to lots of discussions. And no, we don't know what's going on a lot of the time. And it's quite stunning. One can go out to Brussels and immediately one's in a conversation where topics are being raised, like what has just happened in Baden-Württemberg, which might be considered a bit Pythonesque if one said it here in London. But actually, that recent election has a dramatic impact right across the Union in terms of its implications of the influence of Green parties, etc., the environmental agenda. And it's not even mentioned here, that kind of thing. But we don't sometimes know things that are just tremendously to our benefit. And just to give you 3 quick examples, the irony of a UKIP MEP, Lord Dartmouth, has a Danish assistant. Michael Cashman has a French assistant. Stephen Hughes, MEP, has a German assistant. A Director General, who shall remain nameless, it's probably not his fault, inside the European Commission, when I visited him recently, had 4 people in his office, none of whom were British. He himself is. That should really bring it starkly home to you. So we're missing out a lot. And I think our young people are missing out on their opportunity not to just enjoy great linguistic and cultural diversity across the globe, but very much, as I've just mentioned, their job prospects, because in Brussels it goes beyond the institutions. It goes into consultancies, into the private sector, into NGOs, into charities. The opportunities in Brussels across civil society, the public and private sector, and then we could go to other cities like Geneva, etc. So languages will open up an enormous pool of jobs for you. And of course the obvious one, the greater respect and mutual understanding that is so important for progressing policy making in Brussels is absolutely key. Language matters in terms of understanding, and within the European Parliament, my experience before becoming a member, observing political groups, and in this case the Socialist Group, I watched how language impacted on misunderstanding and conflict. Barbara Castle got very irate when she'd used the word confederation, and it was translated into l'union, and she, speaking French, knew immediately and said, no, I did not say union, I said confederation, and there is a world of difference. I can still hear her saying that to this day. And then I walked into the group one day, and there was a massive battle. I took one step back, and it was about Freemasonry. Think about it. Traditions differ from countries all across the Union. Freemasons saved people from fascism in Spain and Portugal, and to a degree, a very famous friend of mine, Moraga van Helmondon, was saved by Catholic nuns. But also, she brought a different perspective on that particular issue to debate. And one of our British members had tabled this very anti-Freemasonry resolution, and suddenly the whole place erupted, and I thought, yes, well, if you had learnt the language, you might have had a chance of also being in the country, of having understood I think you know what I'm saying. Those kinds of conflicts might have been avoided. We now, an ongoing discussion, of course, is the Spanish anger that any future European patent will only be in English, French and German, and we are still, I think, trying to reconcile that issue at the present moment. Going on to my own experience as an MEP, it really enhanced my effectiveness in all kinds of ways because I had fluent French and German, and I'd added some Spanish and not very good Italian, but enough to show a great willingness, plus my musical Italian. Rallentando non troppo took me quite a long way when told in the middle of a joke, but it enhanced my understanding of other colleagues' point of view, and they knew that, so I was able to develop better and wider relationships. It won me positions, so I became effectively a frontbencher, a spokesperson. In this case it was for culture, media, sport, education, where I coordinated a whole team, a cross-national team, and it enhanced my ability to do that. I was asked to be president of Cities and Cinemas of Europe. That wouldn't have happened without a linguistic knowledge. I was asked to go and speak in other countries. It enabled me to be interviewed on television. TV5 would regularly ask me to broadcast. So one's arguments and ideas were taking one across the world. So it won one respect and also an opportunity to feast on the enormous cultural heritage of the people that one was serving with. When I think of Simone Weil as someone who'd been in Auschwitz, and I knew that many wanted to talk to her, and she had understandably a huge reserve. But I was able to speak to her, and I did, and we became friends, and I listened a great deal. And you can imagine, she was a very prominent, as you remember, president of the Parliament. And it was an immense privilege to talk with her, and she was monolingual, actually. Unlike Otto von Habsburg, who informed me one day that they spoke English on Mondays, French on Tuesdays, German on Wednesdays, and Hungarian on Thursdays. Now, that was quite rare. He was that multilingualist. Not everybody was, but so it opened up this amazing cultural world and this world of understanding. It made one able to negotiate better and actually therefore have more influence. And if you ran out of words, it didn't matter. One often made mistakes, and I never did know what German, coal-fired power stations were in German, for example, so I would just ask. It didn't matter. Post-Parliament, since I've been working outside of or adjacent to politics, I've been working in public affairs and communications consultancies specialising in EU affairs. And it goes without saying that one has benefited from not only the political experience but the language experience. As an advisor now on intellectual property, piracy on the internet, this isn't easy language, and I'm having to go back to the drawing board, particularly in Spanish and German, and just read the reports in those languages. My point being that it's a lifelong process, and we can communicate that to people, that it's fine, you go on learning, you can't say that you're completely fluent. And when I used to go into schools, one of the things I haven't heard today was a message that I took to them, which was, it's not about all of you becoming completely fluent to the level of a translator or an interpreter, but to a level of need, so that within a company, the person answering the phone is at a different level of language learning from the person in charge, the head of export marketing. And there was a book called Languages into British Business, I think dates from the 80s, and I wasn't able to find the correct reference, forgive me, but the author made this point that we need to get across to young people that there are different levels of language ability, and that might also be a motivator right through that one of our colleagues, a number of colleagues have talked about today. How do we keep that motivation going? That even with a certain amount of a language, you could be on that switchboard in that small and medium-sized enterprise, helping them sell their product, or giving enough chance for that person from Spain to get through to the export marketing manager. Also, working in charities as I do, the UK Coalition for Cultural Diversity of Expression, we are 8 coalitions across Europe. Recently we lobbied Philippe on the question of cultural cooperation agreements in trade agreements with other countries. And just within that body, I'm using my languages all the time. And that's charity work. I'd like to reinforce the range of possibilities that exist where one can continue to use the languages. And I haven't even mentioned the international, the United Nations, and multinational companies, where again, board members, I've been told when speaking to a headhunter recently, very often when they need that cross-cultural expertise, they are not going for the Brit. It will be the Swede or the Dutch or the German. Again, that loss of influence within the private sector at an international, global level. And yeah, we have a lot of catching up in terms of a city like Brussels, where you have the European and international schools and people come from mixed parentage. The last 2 young women to stay in my house, daughters of friends of mine, one will study medicine at King's, the other will study business studies, not sure what university yet. One was 16 and one was 18. They both had 4 fluent languages, and they really were fluent. And it's quite stunning, and it takes, you know, one steps back and takes a deep breath, and I do sort of say, that's, to other young people, that is what you're competing with in terms of moving towards what we might term a kind of Mandarin class of people in Europe, across the sectors, political, economic, public-private, NGO, charity. Will all these jobs at a certain level may escape a lot of British people. Just to finish in conclusion, I just wanted to reiterate, because nobody has, Chancellor Willy Brandt's famous words, as relevant today as ever: if I'm selling to you, I speak your language. If I'm buying, dann müssen Sie Deutsch sprechen. And picking up on Speak to the Future and campaigns, if I could just give a few bullet points that we might like to prioritise, I think the focus has to be on primary school, because of the way we learn by osmosis until perhaps the age of 8 or 9, and children will literally absorb when presented with films and audiovisual material. I've seen it happen in other languages. Talk about the varied levels of language skills that can serve you well. More EU on TV, I've said that, moving subtitled programming from BBC 4 to BBC 2, thinking about, let us lobby the BBC, it's their responsibility, it's in their remit, it's their mandate for very young children, and children finding way of them being able to hear language. Town twinning, less of the councillors and more of the grassroots, the local fishing club or whatever it is. That is also a way of increasing that exposure that we have at a very grassroots level. Recruiting champions. We need some kind of, I don't know whether it's a register, of those who could proselytise, be asked to do something 2 or 3 times a year. Francis Edmonds, former interpreter, writer and broadcaster, and of course linguist. Dennis McShane MP, Margaret Hodge MP, people in business, a filmmaker. We could gather a long list of people that could be asked to do certain things over the course of the year. I would be happy to join in with anything of that nature. Those are just some ideas, and of course we haven't talked about challenging the Eurosceptic tabloid culture. That's a biggie, perhaps that's another conference, but